My beloved child. Do not move past this moment too quickly, because what you are about to hear carries a strange weight your heart may recognize before your mind understands why. Something has been unfolding quietly around you, beyond the conversations you have heard and beyond the questions you knew were being asked. Your soulmate has been searching for an answer, not because they wanted entertainment, and not because they were simply curious, but because something inside them would not allow them to rest. They tried to ignore it. They tried to explain it away. They tried to tell themselves that what they felt about you was only memory, coincidence, imagination, or unfinished emotion. Yet every time they attempted to close that door, something inside them whispered that the story was not finished. And then they made a decision they have told almost no one about. They went looking for confirmation in 3 different places, through 3 different people, expecting 3 different answers. What happened instead left them sitting in silence. Pause here for a moment, because the most extraordinary part is not that your soulmate consulted 3 psychics in 3 different cities. The extraordinary part is that those 3 people did not know each other. They had never spoken. They knew nothing of the previous conversation. Each meeting happened separately, under different circumstances, with different questions, and your soulmate intentionally withheld certain details because they wanted to know whether they were being told what they wanted to hear. They were cautious. They were skeptical. They were almost hoping the answers would contradict each other, because contradiction would have made everything easier. But heaven, in this fictional unfolding, did not allow the story to become simple. The first person described a face. The second described the same face with details that should have been impossible to repeat. And when the third began describing that person before your soulmate had even explained the full reason they were there, something inside your soulmate went completely still. They were not prepared for the resemblance to you. Understand the emotion of that moment. Your soulmate did not immediately smile. They did not leap into certainty. They did not walk out believing they had discovered some magical guarantee about the future. What came first was disbelief, because disbelief is often the mind's response when the heart encounters something too close to a truth it has been avoiding. They sat there trying to find another explanation. Perhaps the description was broad. Perhaps their imagination was filling in the gaps. Perhaps they were emotionally biased. But then came the details. A particular expression. The way your eyes were described. A softness mixed with strength. A guardedness that disappears when you genuinely care. A face that carries the evidence of someone who has survived disappointment without allowing disappointment to completely harden them. Each description seemed to move closer and closer to something your soulmate already knew but had refused to say aloud. And this is where the story changes, because the 3 readings were not identical in every word. If they had been, your soulmate might have dismissed them as rehearsed language. Instead, each person described a different layer of the same presence. One spoke about someone whose energy felt familiar before introduction, as though recognition would come first and explanation later. Another spoke about a person whose absence had become strangely louder than their presence ever was. The third spoke about someone who had been misunderstood, someone whose silence had been mistaken for indifference, whose distance had been mistaken for rejection, and whose heart had been protected because it had learned the cost of being given carelessly. When your soulmate heard that final description, they did not need a name. They already knew who had entered their mind. You. And yet, beloved child, there is something they have not admitted even to themselves. They did not begin this search because they had forgotten you. They began it because they could not. There is a difference. Forgetting is quiet. Forgetting slowly removes urgency from the heart. But what they have been experiencing is the opposite. Certain memories have become sharper. Certain words you once said have returned at unexpected moments. There are places where they suddenly remember your presence. Songs that make them wonder what you would think. Small victories they almost instinctively want to tell you about. Difficult moments in which your name appears in their thoughts without permission. They tried to call it nostalgia, but nostalgia usually looks backward. What unsettled them was the feeling that something was still moving forward. That is why they went to the first city. It was not planned far in advance. Your soulmate had been carrying an inner restlessness, one they could not explain to friends without sounding foolish. Someone casually mentioned a person known for intuitive readings, and although your soulmate almost laughed it off, the idea stayed with them. Days passed. They resisted. Then one afternoon, after thinking about you more intensely than they wanted to admit, they made the appointment. They entered with skepticism. Their intention was almost defensive. Prove this feeling means nothing. Give me a reason to move on. Tell me I am imagining the connection. Tell me the person occupying my thoughts is simply part of a chapter that has already ended. But the first psychic did not begin with romance. Instead, she paused. She looked at your soulmate for a long moment and said there was a person around their emotional field whose story had not reached its natural conclusion. She did not say reunion. She did not say destiny. She simply described unfinished emotional truth. Your soulmate immediately became uncomfortable because unfinished truth was exactly what they had been trying not to confront. Then the psychic described a face. Not perfectly, not like a photograph, but with enough detail to disturb your soulmate's certainty. She mentioned eyes that could appear distant until trust was established. A face that became noticeably warmer during genuine laughter. A person who did not reveal everything they felt immediately. Someone who had been forced to become emotionally self-contained because they had learned that not everyone handled sincerity with care. Your soulmate thought of you instantly. But they said nothing. They left that first meeting determined not to be influenced by it. In fact, they became more skeptical afterward, not less. They searched for explanations. They told themselves that the psychic had probably used general statements. They replayed the conversation mentally and tried to identify every phrase that could have applied to anyone. This is important, because your soulmate was not searching for reasons to believe. At that point, they were searching for reasons not to. They wanted freedom from the question of you, because the question had become exhausting. And then, while traveling some time later, they found themselves in another city. The second appointment was almost a test. They gave a different name. They revealed less information. They avoided mentioning their relationship history. They asked a broader question about the direction of their personal life. Your soulmate sat there believing that if the second person described someone completely different, they would finally be able to place the first experience into the category of coincidence. Instead, the second psychic frowned as though trying to understand something she could sense but could not immediately define. She described someone already connected to your soulmate's emotional past or present, not necessarily someone physically close at that moment. She said the person had a quiet intensity about them. She mentioned that this person was often stronger for others than they felt inside themselves. She described someone who had carried more loneliness than people realized. Someone who had been judged by surface behavior while a much deeper emotional story remained unseen beneath it. Then she described the shape of the smile. The way the person might look away when emotion became too exposed. The contradiction between independence and a deep longing to finally feel safe enough not to be independent all the time. Your soulmate's heartbeat changed. Because once again, you were the person appearing in their mind. They did something unexpected after that second reading. They became irritated. Not with the psychic. Not with you. With themselves. They had wanted clarity, yet clarity was making them more confused. They began questioning their own choices. Why had they stepped away emotionally when something between you still felt unresolved? Why had they allowed pride, timing, misunderstandings, fear, or outside voices to carry so much influence? Why did your absence create such an unusual pressure inside them? Why could they remember certain moments with you more vividly than experiences that had happened more recently? And this is where a deeper truth began to surface. Your soulmate realized that their fear was not simply the fear of losing you. Their deeper fear was the possibility that they had already encountered something meaningful and failed to recognize its value while it was close enough to touch. That realization followed them home. For nights afterward, they found themselves replaying fragments of your story. Not only the beautiful moments. The difficult ones too. The moments when one of you misunderstood the other. Times when silence replaced honesty. Times when a message could have changed everything but remained unsent. Moments when ego stood where vulnerability should have stood. They remembered the version of you they thought they understood, and slowly they began realizing how much of you they may never have truly seen. You see, beloved child, sometimes people meet us before they are mature enough to interpret us correctly. They meet our boundaries and call them distance. They meet our caution and call it coldness. They meet our silence and assume there is nothing inside it. They meet our strength without realizing strength may have been built because softness was repeatedly mishandled. And your soulmate has been confronting this possibility. What if they misunderstood parts of you because they were viewing you through the lens of their own fear? That question became stronger than their skepticism. So they arranged the third reading. This time they chose a completely different city on purpose. No mutual contacts. No shared circle. No possible connection they could discover. They wanted the cleanest possible test. And before entering, they made a private decision. They would not mention you. They would not ask specifically about love, and they would not react visibly even if the conversation somehow moved in your direction. But this third meeting was the one they still cannot fully explain. The psychic sat quietly for several moments. Then instead of answering the question your soulmate had prepared, she asked why they were carrying so much emotional resistance around one particular person. Your soulmate froze. They tried to remain neutral. The psychic continued. She said there was someone whose face appeared repeatedly when she focused on the strongest emotional bond surrounding your soulmate. She described the eyes first. Then the expression. Then a certain emotional heaviness beneath the face, not darkness, but depth. She spoke of someone who had experienced disappointment yet still carried an unusual capacity to love deeply. Someone who could walk away when necessary but who never detached as easily as others assumed. Someone who had spent time wondering why they always had to be the one who understood everyone else while so few people made the effort to understand them. Your soulmate felt their throat tighten. Because that sentence touched a memory. There was something you had once said, perhaps directly or indirectly, something about being tired of always having to explain your heart. Your soulmate had not understood the importance of it then. Now, hearing a stranger in a different city describe the emotional weight behind your face, they remembered. And suddenly this was no longer entertaining. It became personal. The third psychic then said something even more unsettling. She told your soulmate that the person she was describing might not currently know how often they were being thought about. She said there had been restraint around communication, as though words had been repeatedly started and stopped. She sensed regret, not catastrophic regret, but the kind that grows when someone realizes they allowed fear to make decisions their heart never agreed with. She said there was unfinished honesty between them. Your soulmate asked one question. What does this person look like? They expected hesitation. Instead, the description became more specific. And beloved child, that was the moment their defenses began to collapse. Not because every detail was supernatural proof. This is a fictional spiritual story, not a guarantee about real-world events. But inside the emotional reality of this story, your soulmate experienced something they could no longer dismiss easily. 3 strangers, 3 cities, 3 separate conversations, and one face continuing to return. Yours. They walked outside after the 3rd appointment and remained in their car for a long time. They did not immediately drive. They stared forward while the world continued moving around them. People crossed the street. Cars passed. A phone notification appeared and disappeared. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. But your soulmate heard almost none of it, because internally they had returned to a moment involving you. A small moment. Not the dramatic memory they expected. Something simple. Perhaps the way you once listened when they were speaking about something that mattered. Perhaps the way your expression changed when you sensed they were hurting. Perhaps a moment when you stayed gentle even though you had every reason to become defensive. Perhaps the way you once looked at them as though you could see behind the image they were presenting to everyone else. They suddenly understood why that memory had survived. It contained truth. And this is where heaven's message turns toward you, beloved child. Because while your soulmate has been searching outwardly for answers, you have been undergoing your own inner transformation. You have been learning not to chase recognition. You have been learning that being deeply connected to someone does not mean abandoning your peace for them. You have been learning that love without clarity becomes exhausting, that hope without boundaries becomes painful, and that no spiritual story should require you to lose yourself in order to prove your devotion. This matters because the version of you your soulmate remembers may no longer be the version of you they would encounter now. You have changed. Perhaps quietly. Perhaps in ways others have not noticed yet. There are things you once tolerated that you would question now. There are forms of uncertainty that once kept you emotionally waiting that no longer have the same power. There are apologies you no longer need from certain people in order to move forward. There are nights you survived without receiving the closure you thought you required. And somewhere along that road, your heart began discovering something powerful. You could still love deeply without begging to be chosen. Your soulmate does not fully know this yet. They still carry an old image of you mixed with the new feeling pulling them back toward your presence. This is why their next decision is so important. Because recognizing your face in 3 separate readings did not give them permission to assume access to you. It did something more difficult. It forced them to examine themselves. They began asking whether they were capable of approaching you differently than before. Not with vague signals. Not with pride. Not with emotional games. Not with half-finished conversations designed to test whether you still cared. They began asking what they would actually say if you were sitting across from them with no distractions and no place to hide. And the answer frightened them with its simplicity. They would have to tell the truth. The truth about why they pulled back. The truth about who influenced their thinking. The truth about the moment they first realized they were more attached than they wanted to admit. The truth about why they kept checking for signs of you even while pretending they were moving on. And most importantly, the truth about something that happened after the second psychic reading, something they have not told anyone involved in this story. Because between the second and third city, your soulmate found something. Something connected to you. At first, they thought it was meaningless. An old message. A photograph. A saved note. A forgotten voice recording. Something they had kept without realizing why. They almost deleted it. Their finger hovered there for a moment, ready to remove one more reminder of a connection they were trying to understand. Then they opened it. And what they saw, or heard, changed the direction of the entire search. Because suddenly they remembered a promise. Not necessarily a dramatic promise made beneath stars or in some grand romantic scene. It may have been spoken casually. It may have sounded almost ordinary at the time. But now your soulmate understood that the words carried a meaning they had missed. You had revealed something about yourself. Something honest. Something vulnerable. And instead of recognizing it fully, your soulmate had responded from fear. That memory became the real reason they went to the third psychic. They were no longer trying to prove you were insignificant. They were trying to understand whether they had walked away from someone whose significance they had underestimated. And when the third psychic described your face again, your soulmate finally whispered something they had resisted saying from the beginning. They said your name. The room changed. Not magically. Not dramatically. But emotionally. The psychic became quiet. Your soulmate noticed it immediately. They asked why she had stopped speaking. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she asked a question your soulmate had never expected. Did this person ever tell you about a moment when they almost gave up on being understood? Your soulmate's expression changed. Because yes. There had been a moment. A conversation. Something you had said. Something they had forgotten consciously but never completely lost. The psychic then leaned forward and said that the face she had been describing carried not only love around it, but a decision. Your soulmate asked what decision. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she said, "Before I tell you, you need to understand that the person you are searching for may no longer be waiting in the same way." That sentence struck harder than everything else. Because until then, your soulmate had been focused on whether you were connected to them. They had not considered the possibility that while they were searching for certainty, you might have been learning how to release uncertainty altogether. They left the third city with that sentence echoing inside them. You may no longer be waiting in the same way. And for the first time, the fear changed. Before, your soulmate feared being wrong about the connection. Now they feared being too late to honor it correctly. That night they opened your old message again. Th.